The movie The Old Guard is so fresh right now that it's trending on Twitter. So why should I, Anchor Pete, be covering it? Shouldn't I be talking about a cartoon from the 1990s or maybe a David Lynch film that came out like a decade or two ago?
Sometimes it's good to take a break from those things and look deeper and deeper into more modern stuff.
I'm sorry. I did that. Why don't we just go to the Old Guard review? Welcome to another episode of Anchor's Points. I am Anchor Pete, and we are here today to talk about the 2020 movie, The Old Guard. The Old Guard was released on Netflix on July 10th, 2020. It was produced by Skydance Media and was based on the comic created by Greg Rucka and Leandro Fernandez. The screenplay was written by Greg Rucka, and it was directed by Gina Prince-Bythewood. Gina Prince-Bythewood has made other noteworthy films like Love and Basketball and The Secret Life of Bees. The Old Guard film follows the original story arc from the comics beat for beat, and in many cases has the exact same dialogue as the comic. There are a few significant changes to story details, but the plot from the comic and the plot from the movie are exactly the same. Watching the movie within 48 hours of reading the entire first story arc of the comic puts a spotlight on specific points. It shows ways that the story from the original miniseries could have been improved upon, while at the same time showing that there are still many things that you can do in the medium of comics that you can't do with a feature film. If you want to listen to the review of the comic, I will leave a link to that video in the description below. I'm not going to re-summarize the plot since, like I said, the movie and the comic have the exact same plot. How the movie improves upon the comic. There are two main consequences that Andy, specifically, but all the Immortals, face in the movie that raises the stakes and tension of the third act. The third act of the movie is a lot more suspenseful than the third act of the comic. I'm assuming that some details from the second arc of the Old Guard comic were incorporated into this movie. In the movie, they went into greater detail about the Immortal that Andy cared deeply for that disappeared. In the comic, that Immortal's connection to Andy and the cause of her disappearance are summed up in a single line. In the movie, we learn what happens to that other Immortal in the scene that is probably the best scene in the movie with the most emotional weight. The scene establishes one of the new consequences I was talking about before. The purpose as to why the Immortals exist is alluded to in this movie, and I was very satisfied with the reason they came up with. The plot is exactly the same as the comic, but the conclusion is set up in a slightly different way. This puts more focus on the character of Niall. By having Niall play a vital role in the conclusion of the story, it adds weight to her character and makes her more than just a POV character for the audience. How the comic is superior to the movie. Even though the comic utilizes multiple colors, it feels like it's in black and white. Every panel has a distinct color that saturates the image, combined with one other color for contrast. This is done with beautiful effect. The blue colors give off a sense of solitude or of peace or of loneliness. The tans or yellows are bright and alarming. The coloring plays into the theme of the book. Immortal warriors live a life of solitude and keep to the shadows, with fear of being brought into the light and shown to the world. There's nothing stylish about the cinematography or lighting of this movie. The movie looks exactly like what it is, a movie released directly to Netflix. Every shot is very utilitarian, set up to showcase the action that is occurring or the dialogue that is being delivered. There's no style to it whatsoever. That is not to say the film is bad. All the actors, with the exception of Harry Melling, who played the villain, Merick, turned in believable performances. You can feel the love between the two Immortals who have loved each other for centuries. You can feel the bitterness of the Immortal who is sick of living. Chiwetel Ejiofor plays a much more sympathetic version of the character of Copley than the character we see in the comics. Charlize Theron, though, I'm afraid to say, is miscast. I should clarify that. Charlize Theron plays the lead character Andy, and the Andy in the movie is different from the Andy in the book. Charlize Theron does a great job as the movie version of Andy, but her depiction of the character causes the story of the movie to be inferior to the story of the book. The Andy in the Old Guard comic makes it a point to not even learn the names of her many lovers because she doesn't want to bother having to forget them. The Andy in the Old Guard movie really likes candy bars and baked items. The Old Guard comic version of Andy is jealous of an immortal that she suspects has died. And she spends most of the comic wishing her life would end. Andy in the movie feels like her secret immortal strike team has not made enough of a difference in the world. Please don't get me wrong, I love Charlize Theron. She is in my top 5 of favorite actresses. Though she does not physically resemble the Andy from the comic, she could portray that version of the character if given the correct material. Theron is far more aggressive and violent in Mad Max Fury Road. She seems far more hopeless portraying a stay-at-home mom in Tully than she seems playing an immortal that wants to die in this movie. Charlize Theron, if she physically resembled the main character more, deserves a more bleak, gritty, and stylized version of this story. Andy in both the Old Guard comic and the movie is thousands of years old. The comic version of Andy has the appearance of a woman that lived somewhere between ancient Greece and the Middle East during the very beginning of history. The way Leandro Fernandez drew Andy in the comic, she fit in as perfectly within the flashbacks to thousands of years ago as she did in the scenes taking place in the modern day. Charlize Theron does not fit into the flashbacks in the ancient past, and unfortunately, that affects the believability that her version of Andy is an immortal. Another aspect of the comic that really drove home the idea of immortal warriors serving as mercenaries was the over-the-top violence and gore in the book. The movie version of the Old Guard barely feels like an R-rated film. The comic is far more gruesome with its depiction of violence. Characters' heads are blown off, their eyes pop out of their heads when they fall from great heights. Their immortality is graphically on display within every 3 pages or so, because they are constantly healing from taking on brutal damage. In the Old Guard film, the gore never goes past red blotches representing gunshot wounds. I enjoyed this movie even though I have pointed out a handful of major flaws. I always have a deep sense of gratitude when a movie is made based on a comic and there is a large audience out there to enjoy it. I'm extra excited when the comic that is adapted is an original work made by one of my very favorite creators. Besides Stumptown, this is the first major live-action adaptation of a Greg Rucka comic. That alone makes me appreciate the Old Guard movie for what it is. A competent action thriller with a tight focus on its plot and a handful of fun action scenes. I'm going to give this movie 3 Clemmies. That is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the review. I'm working on a few things, including setting up a new author interview. And I'm also thinking about doing a commentary for The Transformers, the movie from 1986. Besides that, we have our typical comic book reviews, movie reviews, and novel reviews. So just keep watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.